Hello everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. Something Irish, as I promised you last week. This is the Waterford Koffi? Koffi? I think Koffi, K-O-F-F-I, a 50% ABV, 6-year-old single malt, matured in a combination of American and French oak casks. Waterford, where do we begin? First of all, still a fan of the glass stopper that you get with it. I think this is a very useful thing that more brands should go into. I've dealt with so much Waterford stock through the company I work with on deliveries, never had a breakage in these stoppers ever before, compared to some regular corks, which can just snap. The packaging, my girlfriend detests it. That's a strong word, she's not a fan of it. I quite like it. I don't know what it is about this art style. I mean, obviously this is nice and iridescent and it catches the light and stuff. But I just really like this multiple painted thing. It's also reflected on the label too. I never keep boxes to whiskey, but I might just keep this in the box in the drinks cabinet because it looks quite nice. And then you've obviously got the Waterford on the side there. Very swish, very premium. This is in a similar vein to the Cuvee that they brought out about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. Their oldest and most complex expression yet. Before we try it, I had to use a very different memory card this week, so there's not a lot of time left on this, so I'll keep it brief. Waterford, I think, has confused a lot of people as a product. Even in its basic essence as an Irish whiskey distillery, it's only double distilled whiskey, it's not triple distilled, everything is 50% ABV across the board. They're releasing more peated whiskey, which is a good thing. Everything's natural colour, everything's non-chill filtered. Most of these things are all very good. But when they brought their first whiskies out in 2020, I remember having to fight tooth and nail to get a bottle of each of them. They were called the Ballykilcavan 1.1 and the Ballymorgan 1.1. I was the first person to have reviews of them on YouTube as far as I was aware, and no one cared. Now I don't know if that's because inaugural Scotch whiskey bottles tend to gather people's attention more. It was irrelevant. I drank both of them anyway. So, but the thing that I think a lot of people got confused with is people began to collect Waterford. It's a brand new Irish whiskey distillery. It's run by the guy who used to run Bruichladdich and have shares in Murray McDavid, Mark Renier. So, you know, it's got a solid history to it. But they just kept releasing release after release after release, and then things were only available in Belgium or the bits of Europe, and there was an American exclusive and things you can only get at the distillery. And they were like, well, if you can't come to the distillery or get to that location, we can't provide it to you. Which I think is a little bit fair, a little bit unfair. I believe if someone's willing to pay you for a product, you should try and get it to them somehow, if it's, you know, something you've created. But if it is only designed for one market with certain tax and things, then that makes it a little bit more difficult. And I think they've only released 1.1 and 1.2 releases of their single origin stuff. So there's like the Ballymorgan and the Ballykilcavan were 1.1s, but then there were 1.2 releases. They've done a couple of very limited single cask releases. They have a Cuvee, which was their sort of standard whiskey. And now this, the Koffi. Koffi. I really should have figured that out before I bought it and reviewed this. Which is their oldest whiskey yet at 6 years old. So I think collectors were a little bit annoyed. And I think regular whiskey drinkers were not particularly willing to pay over £70 plus for a 3-and-a-bit-year-old whiskey, possibly 4, that came in very pretty presentation. It's arguably the prettiest presentation for a whiskey bottle I've seen. But at the same time, oh, there you go. It's called the Koffi because it's named after the artist Nathaniel Koffi. I really should look at these labels more before I review these things. As a whiskey style, even though it isn't triple distilled and is higher alcohol than most standard Irish whiskey releases, they've always been driven by these nice, it's been a bit of a theme of whiskies actually of the last couple of reviews. Peachy, lemony, sweet, easy drinking styles. I've only tried a tiny bit of this beforehand. And if you are interested in the price, this bottle is pretty much anywhere between about £72 to £75 a bottle, depending on where you purchase. So about the same price everywhere. But let's dive into it and let's see what's going on. there is something particularly distinct about Waterford's distillate. And I think at this point, I've tried about 10 to maybe 12 different versions of Waterford. And they all have this very distinct smell. And even though it's not peated, there is a very earthy, grassy, muddy quality to what you smell. It's almost like petrichor or like a wet field. After, you know, like imagine walking through a field with your dog or just on a walk after it's finished raining and there's that very particular smell in the air. Every single Waterford I've ever had has that smell. Fresh grass, like dew on grass, wet mud. It just has, they just have these like naturally earthy qualities to them without having any peat in it at all in this particular release. Outside of that, and again, we've had a running theme of fruit-driven whiskies in the last couple of weeks. I suppose it is summer, so that kind of makes sense. There are some really nice lemon sherbet, like strawberry jam, biscuity, shortcakey, shortbread things to this. But an interesting point I will say, I did a blind tasting at a watch shop a couple of weeks ago, and we put the Waterford Cuvee on there. And that, if this is 6, that can only be 4, 5.5 year old stock. And everyone loved it, and they thought it was significantly older than it actually is. And I can see why you would think that when you jump to this one too. Dog still snoring, apologies. And there is a thing with Waterford, and we're not dealing with sherry casks here. It's French oak, American oak. The Cuvee, I think, is a slightly different blend of casks. They have these older qualities to them, and it always comes across as like old leather. And when you contrast that with that natural grassy earthiness, because this is still a vatting of all of their single farm origin stuff, whether or not you choose to believe that is beneficial or not after being distilled twice and then vatted together with other stock, I'll leave that for a different argument. I'm intrigued as to how they get that smell within this, because it shouldn't really be there. But let's taste it. Not the first whiskey I've tried today, but by far the driest and the spiciest. It is a pretty full-on product. There's subtlety in the nose of it, and there are things you smell that you shouldn't expect. But up front, especially when it comes to taste, it is quite a rambunctious, sticking with the old school Brook Laddie approach, punky style of whiskey. There's a mineraliness to it. Like for any of you that are big hikers, or you go like exploring through caves and stuff, there's a taste which is like limestone. When you get that smell in the air that you inevitably inhale in like big cave systems. Limestone, wet rock, even like the smell of things like potassium. That might be the most intense tasting note we've ever put on here. Outside of the weird earthy minerally stuff, there is this beautiful like vanilla bean, fresh vanilla pod, slightly youthful taste. It is only 6-year-old stock. It is natural colour, so it is a beautiful colour. It's actually not too far off the SMWS bottle we reviewed a couple of weeks ago, and it's 10 years younger. But there is a youthful new make spirit quality to it. But it is a young distillery, so I wouldn't hold too much against it. With that comes a slight touch of things like acetone. It is not column still distillate, it is pot still distillate. But then the more you go back to it, the more those kind of nature-driven fresh, wet, green field in the peak of spring as like apple blossom and all that stuff is coming through. It just becomes so much more accentuated. This is a really nice whiskey with a slight spicy edge to it. And it is a lot more in terms of cost than some of the other whiskies I've reviewed recently. But I still think it's as good. I think this is, if not the finest expression of Waterford I've yet tried, because it has all the qualities of some of the bottles I tried on their first releases, and then some of their newer stuff, and some of the things in between. I still haven't tried any of their peated whiskey yet. But it is really, really good quality. I wouldn't say buy this if you are expecting a classic Irish whiskey experience. I would never define this as a classic Irish whiskey. This is very much the new approach to the new world of Irish whiskey and the acceleration that Irish whiskey has had in the last 3 decades, and especially what is happening with all of the new distilleries in both the North and the Republic of Ireland. Waterford has deliberately tried to set itself apart. The bottle design, the artwork, the double distillation. Some other distilleries in Ireland do that too, don't get me wrong. The higher alcohol percentage, the use of French oak, the use of Spanish sherry casks too. It's very deliberate. And I think this is the most vivid expression of that so far. And I think as a result, no matter what you boil it down to, it is pretty tasty liquid. You might think it's a little bit expensive. I would probably say it's about £20 more expensive than I would be willing to pay again. Like if this was a £55 bottle, I think it'd be a lot more approachable to people. At between 70 to 75, it's going to instantly put a lot of people off. But I still think it is a solid 8 out of 10. It is a very, very tasty Irish whiskey, and it's nice to have something from Ireland which does buck the trend in the same way that some people love Hazelburn and some people love Auchentoshan and triple distilled Benriach. It's nice to have things that just don't necessarily do what you mentally think they're going to. I cannot remember the scores I gave for the original 1.1 releases, the first 2 releases. I think they were like either 7 and 7.5s. I don't think they quite got to 8s. But I'm going to give that an 8 because I think it is very tasty. So please do comment below if you've bought this, if you're a Waterford fan. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all next week. Cheers.